Alrighty. Hello, everyone. I'm Katharina. I'm the head of content at Journal Resources, and welcome to tonight's event on breaking into travel journalism. We've got a lot of stuff to cover tonight from an amazing speaker. But before we start, I'm just going to run through some housekeeping bits that you might want to be aware of. So basically, this event is going to be recorded, so there's no real need for you guys to take notes, as we'll be sending you all the watch back link later. Closed captions are also available if you need them. You can just click the CC button below. We've received a lot of your questions in advance, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. But you can also drop in any questions in the chat box anytime, and we'll try to hop in and try to answer your questions as we go along. Okay, well, if you've been around Journal Resources for a while, you'll know that we actually did this same travel journalism event last year, and it absolutely sold out. So obviously people are very, very interested in travel journalism, and we just had to bring this event back for newcomers and those of you who want to know more. And just a quick intro for our speaker tonight. Karen Edwards she's been in journalism for almost 20 years now. She's been working in digital and print across lifestyle, entertainment, showbiz, and now she's mainly doing travel writing. So basically, suffice to say, she is very, very experienced, and she will be here to answer all the questions that you have regarding this industry. I'll now hand things over to Karen to introduce herself, and then we'll talk about her career journey, and we'll take things from there. Karen, over to you.
Thank you, Kat. Thanks so much for having me again to do this talk. And I hope everyone here finds it really useful. So do chip in with questions and anything like that. So yeah, as Kat said, I'm Karen Edwards. I have been a writer and journalist for nearly 20 years, or 20-ish years. And I've had a really interesting journey to get to where I am. But something I really want to get across in what I say is that you can 100% be a writer if that's what you want to be. And secondly, you can also follow the path that's right for you. So you can move across different sectors of journalism and writing. And hopefully I can help you know how to do that a little bit more. So I started off, I've wanted to be a writer and a journalist since I was about 13. I was an avid reader of teen magazines back then. I used to, obviously then we didn't have the internet, so every Sunday my dad would take me down to the newsagents, and I'd bring in a pile of magazines and sit on my carpet in my bedroom and read through every magazine, and absolutely loved it, and absolutely dreamt of being on a masthead one day. So back then I used to read magazines like Smash Hits and TV Hits and Top of the Pops magazine. I don't know if anyone here remembers those. I might be a bit old, but it just used to fill me with so much excitement. And when I used to think about what it must be like to do those interviews and things like that, I just thought that's my absolute dream. So from a very young age, I knew that's where I wanted to go. So when it came to choosing subjects and things like that, I ended up choosing journalism, which, you know, that it's not exactly a must-do path. You know, people go from doing different degrees into journalism, and that's absolutely fine. I didn't know what else I wanted to do other than journalism. It's all I thought about. So I ended up doing a BA honours in journalism, which I passed. And during that course, I had to do work experience as a part of my third year, I think it was. So I wrote to Smash Hits and basically said, I love this magazine, have always wanted to work here, and now I'm a journalism student. I'd really love the opportunity to do work experience with you. And they amazingly said yes. So that's where my career started. I owe the team at Smash Hits back in 2003 big time for getting me in. And it was from there that everything started. So at the same time, I had a bit of a timeline running where I was traveling quite a lot. I was backpacking. I started off in South America when I was about 17 or 18 and did a trip out there completely off my own back. That was an absolute dream. And I realized that I really love solo travel. And I love sort of traveling to places that are rarely visited and sort of getting off the beaten track. That became my norm. And I carried on doing that alongside of working, just taking holidays and going off for 2 or 3 weeks here and there. And so that was kind of running alongside each other until about 2010. I'd been sort of working in sort of entertainment music. I kept going back to smash hits, and eventually someone gave me a job. And I was writing music reviews for a really long time at Heat magazine randomly. And eventually it got to the stage where I felt like that I'd kind of outgrown that a little bit. It wasn't what I enjoyed. It wasn't what I loved as much anymore. I'd fallen out of love with the sort of showbiz journalism side of things. I took the plunge and went freelance. And what was brilliant about that was I had been working at women's magazines and teen magazines for quite a long time. So I'd known some of the editors who had come through the ranks and had now moved on to other titles. So I started pitching travel pieces. I started backpacking more on my own because I was now freelance. I had more time, and I would pitch out as much as possible. And that somehow magically got me into travel writing. So it was very much a combination of sort of experience in the industry, knowing contacts, having that background in journalism already, but that all came down to that one work experience thing. So, you know, there are a lot of factors there that have got me to where I am, and I'm very grateful for all of them.
Wow, that sounds great. It sounds like quite a journey. So you didn't actually set out to start in travel writing, then you sort of like segued into it or like fell into it. Am I right?
Yeah, I'd say segued into it. I would say my two big loves in life generally are music and travel. And I started off in music and then sort of diverted into travel. And I think I say this quite often, but I've kind of moved quite organically. I think it's what's felt right as a writer for me. And as soon as I grew out of writing about famous people, essentially, I sort of segued into travel, and that was very much what felt natural to me. And as a result, I think that comes out in my writing as well, because I have a passion for it, because I love it so much, and because my tastes have grown as I've got older as well. And, you know, I have more to say and more to recognize in my travels. So I think that comes out in the writing. So something I would say is it's great to do what feels natural for you. If travel is already a love of yours, absolutely follow that.
Wow. Do you feel like your work previously in lifestyle entertainment actually is translated well into your travel journalism work?
You know, you wouldn't think so, but yes, it has. And I'd say the interview skills is quite a big part of it. So I used to interview music artists mainly back then. And nowadays I spend a lot of time interviewing people in the field when I'm traveling, whether that's a local farmer, whether that's someone who's coming up with sustainable fuel products. And, you know, I want to learn more about that, whether that's someone in travel and tourism in the industry who's talking about the future of travel and tourism. You know, I spend a lot of time interviewing people for articles, and I honed those skills by interviewing random musicians. So it's definitely, you know, gone together very well, and it's definitely helped me be a better writer now.
Cool. Well, you said you didn't really do any specific training for travel journalism, but you know, do you think it's good? Do you think it would give people like a boost who want to get in travel journalism? Like, are there any specific training or qualifications that you think would be good to take?
Absolutely. I think if you've got the means to do training, it's a great thing to do. Not everyone can manage that, because we live in a world where we need to earn a living and we need to get out there and do that. And I do think if you have the opportunity to do, say, a news associates course, for example, they're brilliant. They're absolutely brilliant. But equally, we've got resources like Journo Resources that help guide you, you know, showing you the way into the industry. So there are it's a very individual thing, I think. For me, you know, I chose to do a degree in journalism because I was so set on that path. And yes, that was a while ago, but for me, no one has ever asked me what degree I did. No one has ever asked me for my qualifications. They just want me to write something that is good and that will sell and will work for their readership. And the way I do that is by writing more and more. So the actual practical element of writing and practicing your writing is actually really important as well. So I would say it's really an individual thing whether you get that training or not. If you have the means to, definitely, please do go for it. But if you don't let that put you off.
Cool. Well, as you know, a lot of our general resources audience are journalism students, journalism graduates, or early career journalists. How would you advise somebody like that to start and build up a travel niche?
It's a really good question. If you're a complete beginner to journalism, if you're literally coming out of university or coming out of a course, and you haven't written before, I would say just be patient, be ready for a bit of a long haul, workout here, and start by, getting on social media like Twitter, for example. I know Twitter's a really odd place at the moment and Elon's doing some really odd stuff there, but it's still a really good resource in terms of following editors, in terms of following publications and learning what editors want and what they actually they literally look out for. They put out requests asking for. So that would be my first port of call. Set up your social media. You don't have to be active and like really full on with your own social media, but follow the right people. And once you follow one journalist, one travel journalist, and have a look at their followers, you'll find 50 to 100 more people that you can follow and, look at what they're talking about, look at the discussions people are having, the topics that come up. And that's your first idea of where we are as an industry and where you need to be as a journalist, where your head needs to be. And from there, obviously follow up on those pitch call outs and things like that, which we'll get into in a minute. But I would say that's the best place to start. You need to start putting your head into the industry. If you're in another sector of journalism, you'd be in a similar position to where I was, where you're fortunate enough to already have relationships with editors, and especially commissioning editors on different titles, or the title you've been working for if you're staff. If that is the case, be honest with them, have the chat with them and say, I love what I'm doing at the moment, but I'm really interested in travel. I'm really passionate about it in my personal life. Can I pitch my next trip to you? So the next time you do go on a holiday, you might not necessarily get paid. So great, if you're on staff, you do that in your working time. And that's usually what companies are happy with you doing, publishing houses are happy with you doing. But pitch away, pitch your next holiday, and see if you can get that commission. And start with those small steps. It's doable. It is completely doable. And I think your passion really comes across. So if an editor knows you, they will take a punt on you and they'd be really happy to give you that chance, as long as, you're not making too many demands of them. And go from there.
Great. Well, obviously, I'm assuming everybody in the room right now is very interested in journalism and travel, and that's why you're here. But okay, like Karen, like speak to us like as if we're complete beginners. Like do like a dummies forward for us, right? Like how would you go about writing that travel pitch? How would you go about ideating and then writing it in the first place?
Okay, so the first thing I would say, if you're pitching to a travel editor or a section head at a magazine, they have very little time. So this needs to be in your head all the time when you're writing a pitch. So what you're trying to get across is your idea in the most succinct but also quite detailed way, that they can glance at it and get the idea of what you're trying to pitch here. So what I do is highlight that I'm sending over a pitch. So in the subject of the email, I will write pitch in capital letters and then put the headline of what I think the pitch should be. Or if it's maybe not that straightforward to put the headline in there, just put the destination in there or the region that you're writing about. And then in the body of the email, I usually do, hello, I'm just sending over this pitch. It might be in response to a call out, in which case do mention that, show that you've paid attention and you are responding to something they've said. And then what I would do is write a headline that very much speaks to what this story is about, and then go into about a 200-word pitch of what the story is, what the backdrop to the story is. Bear in mind you're so limited for words that you don't need to state anything obvious. So for example, if I was pitching something on the Greek islands and climate change at the moment and what people are going through, I wouldn't say, as you know, there have been these fires in Greece. People already know that. You don't need to waste words on that. You just go in and say your idea and what they don't know already, essentially. And just remember that that one thing the editor is going to think about when they go to commission you is why you are the right person to write this article. Why isn't it someone who lives in this destination? Why isn't it another journalist who they have been commissioning for the last 10 years and know very well? So put in your link to that story. Why are you passionate about it? Why do you care so much about this story that you should be the one to write it? So you might have a personal link to that destination. It might be somewhere that you've been over and over again with your family. It might be somewhere that you know have watched change through the years. It might be somewhere that you're planning to get married one day. You know, you might have whatever that link is. Put that in, and if it's not obvious, try and find it before you make that pitch, and make sure that goes into that email. Why are you the right person to write this piece? And then if you're pitching for the first time, and obviously that editor is not going to know you, what I do is I put in a second paragraph, which is a little bit about me. So it links to a portfolio or a website, if you've got one, or potentially, like, if you put photos up on Instagram, maybe your Instagram, so that they can see that you are well traveled, and that, you know, the kind of captions you write and things like that, and just say, this is what I've done so far, this is my experience, and this is me. If you need more information, feel free to email me. And that gives them the opening to start a dialogue with you as well. But like I say, literally 2 paragraphs, a 200-word pitch, and then a little bit about you, and as obvious and as straightforward as you can make it. And yeah, send it off, cross everything. Remember, when I say editors don't have a lot of time, they really don't have a lot of time. We're talking, you know, they get hundreds, if not thousands, of emails a week, especially commissioning editors. And they're dealing with not only people pitching to them, but they also get a lot of emails from PRs talking about the latest products or latest destinations and news in those destinations. So their inboxes are full. So that's why that sort of pitch headline in the subject has to stand out, firstly. And secondly, you know, there is a good chance that they won't email you back if they don't know your name first time. And that's something that can be really hard when you're starting out, because you take it very personally. Don't take it personally. Please don't take it personally. Every one of us, you know, 20 years into my career, editors still ignore me. It's so normal. And it's because they genuinely are inundated with information. So don't take it personally. Give it a few days. And just as you would chase up any other email, whether, you know, work, school, college, whatever, do that again, maybe 4 days later, 5 days later, when it feels about right. Send another email and just say, just following up on the below, I'd really appreciate it if you could let me know either way. Obviously, if they ignore you again, that probably means that it's not right for them, and that is editor speak for it's not right for me, is if they keep ignoring you. So it's just something to bear in mind. Again, not a personal thing. It just very much is that they don't have the time in their day to respond to 100 people asking for a pitch and to say yes or no, so they only reply to the yeses. So just bear that in mind. But yeah, that's a 101 on how to write your first pitch, I guess.
That's perfect. I think that was so comprehensive. And it's interesting that you finished with, you know, the waiting and possibly being rejected, because we did receive questions about when somebody asked, saying they thought the waiting time, you said about 4 days, they thought a week. But anyway, either ways, they thought that it counted as dead time, like, I guess time that could have been spent like pitching to other people. Like, how would you overcome that? And going on from that, would you simultaneously pitch to other publications as well and other editors?
That's a really good question. So if you are planning a trip, and you're planning to do this as a career, I guess what you're thinking about is also earning a living, as well as, you know, trying to make that next trip as fun and as amazing as you want it to be. So, I mean, I would say you need to work out what a day rate is, what you need to be paid daily to make a good monthly salary that is enough for you to pay all your bills, to, you know, live comfortably, to be in a situation you want to be. So once you worked out that daily rate, then you're working back. So if you're away for 4 days, you essentially need to earn 4 days worth at least, plus the writing time. You know, it doesn't always work out that way. It's not always that straightforward, but that should be what you're roughly aiming for. In which case, probably one article is not going to be enough. Articles can vary from, people pay from £150 to £600, depending on the title for one article. It depends on the number of words, it depends on the kind of piece it is, and it very much depends on the actual title. Print titles tend to pay more than online. That's just across the board. And if you're writing for print and it also goes online, they'll only give you one fee. So it's something to bear in mind. So generally, I would aim to get at least 2 or 3 at the very least. And if I can get more than that, brilliant. And the way you're trying to do that is to look at different angles. So a rule of thumb, don't send the same pitch to more than one editor unless it has been full on rejected. That person doesn't want it. Because generally editors want exclusives. They want brand new information in their publication that hasn't been elsewhere. So if you are going to Scotland and you're sort of having a bit of a tour of northeast Scotland to Aberdeen, for example, you've got a few different angles you could look at. You could look at the sort of nature and hiking and rewilding elements of Scotland. You could look at the sort of city life in Aberdeen and what's going on there. You could look at camping and the sort of more rustic side of exploring Scotland. There are a few different things that you can research and find out about any destination that can give you different angles, and those are very basic angles I'm looking at there, and you want to find deeper stories obviously within those angles, but that is what I would go in. I would find a completely different angle for each editor that I'm pitching to and each story, and adapt that to the readership. So for example, if you're pitching to a luxury mag, you want to go for maybe a nice city guide with some really luxury well-being experiences, and something a bit more sort of upmarket. If you're pitching to an outdoor mag, rewilding and sort of the ecological side of Scotland, camping would be fantastic. But you're tailoring your pitch to your audience, to your readership that you're pitching to, and the title that you're pitching to. So again, sit down with those titles and really spend some time examining what they write about, how they write about those things, and what sort of content they will be looking for. But yeah, there's a quite a bit to think about when you're doing multiple pitches, but it's completely worth it. And it's really satisfying when, all of those come back and you think, okay, I've got 4 stories out of this trip and I had a wonderful trip. Brilliant.
Yeah, I do think pitching itself is an art form. So in terms of the actual ideation itself, we are living in a world right now where everybody has about 20, different country flags in their Instagram bio. Everybody's super well traveled and their journeys are so well documented online. In this sort of situation, how do you find fresh angles? How do you find new stories?
So if I know I'm focusing on a destination, I spend a lot of time reading blogs, reading previous articles from everything from Nat Geo to Wanderlust to the Times, to literally anything I can find on a destination. I will read and read and read as much as possible, and get as much information as I can and background about that place as I can. Firstly, to understand what has been written before and what has been covered in the past, but also it's from those articles that usually a little nugget, a little seed of an idea starts to germinate for a completely different angle. So for example, a while ago, I did just before COVID actually, I did a lovely trip to Pakistan, which was to a particular place in Pakistan as well, which is in the northwest, and it's just a really beautiful mountainous area. And I knew nothing about this place. I didn't know where to start. There isn't a lot written on Pakistan. It was only recently that BA started flying there, so there wasn't a lot of travel coverage anyway. So I just started researching and putting in keywords around the area into Google, and a YouTube video came up, which was an incredible video, I think filmed by a local resident who was just documenting life in this area. And she was talking about how for some reason the elders, the sort of elder community who live in this area, live to be around 100, and they defy the national average age of, which was incredible, absolutely incredible. So I think the national average was something like people live up to about 68 or 69. And at this time, people in this area, people were living up to like 98, 99, 100. She just did this whole thing around, you know, it's the mountain air, it's you know, everything around a healthy lifestyle. So I started looking more into what was there. So I did a bit more research into the area. Was it agricultural land? You know, it was obviously mountainous, but how did they survive? Were they living off the land? You know, what was the whole sort of environment and ecosystem we're looking at here? And I gradually formed this picture of what the area was like. So when I pitched that piece, or pitched that particular piece, I pitched a few from Pakistan, but that was for that area. My whole idea was to find people who were reaching 100 and ask them, you know, what they put their healthy lifestyle down to, and then go on a bit of a tour of the land and understand, you know, how they farm there, for example, how they work as a community. And it was, in the end, it turned out to be one of the most enlightening trips. I came back wishing I lived more like these people. It was incredible. But you know, everything's organic, not because they call it organic, but that is just the way they farm. They don't have those chemicals to add to their food. They are very much subsistence farmers, so everything is grown in the backyard. They pick their cherries off the tree and eat them that day. And the community is so powerful because they work together. There's no one-upmanship. Everyone comes together like one big family in this village, and they really look after each other. So everyone sort of gets a fair go. So there's less stress, there's less sort of, they're not holding it in their body as much. So everything about their lifestyle was about well-being. So this article that I ended up writing is one of my favorite articles I've ever written. It's called The Old Country, and it ended up being in a book called The Best British Travel Writing of the 21st Century, which came out last year. And I was very proud of that piece, but I owe it all to, you know, just this incredible research that went into finding out what this place was like. It took me days to figure that out. It was days and days of research, but it was so worth it for what came out of it. So I really recommend that. Just spend that time researching.
Okay, going on from that, would you recommend specializing in a particular destination and sort of, I think, carving out your own niche to be the go-to journalist for a particular region? Or do you think that's not that great of an idea?
I do actually think that's quite a good idea. Especially if there's something that comes to you quite naturally. So you might have family connections to a place. It might be somewhere that you've just traveled to loads and you love. Or it might be somewhere, you know, where you like the food and, you know, you've had a bit of a connection there and you want to go and explore more. But if you have a link, any kind of special link to a place, it can really help you stand out against other writers. And if it's a topic, for example, I specialize in responsible travel, and that's very much grown out of my own travels. It's a very organic topic that has grown within me while I've been a traveler. So that is something I would definitely recommend. If there's something like that you start looking at and you realize that you absolutely love this, you're very passionate about this, and you want to discover more about that topic, then do follow your nose on that, follow your gut instinct, learn more about it. You know, it takes a while to get to the stage where you can call yourself a go-to on that topic, but put in the work. And it does help, because editors, once they start recognizing you as someone who can speak well on that topic, they will come to you and you will become the go-to journalist. So it's well worth it if there is something like that.
Cool. And in a similar vein to scales, would you recommend starting freelance in travel journalism, or do you think it's better to start working in-house first and then sort of segue into travel journalism in your free time?
I think both ways can work. It's a very individual situation, but I mean, if you've got the opportunity to work in-house somewhere, and it's something you think you'll enjoy doing. Obviously, I don't recommend putting yourself through something you don't want to do, but if it's something that you think you will enjoy doing, and then you can sort of segue into travel through that, absolutely. That's probably a safer financial way of doing it. It's more secure, so that takes the burden off you. But equally, if that's not an option, freelancing is entirely possible. You can do it while doing a different job completely, or you can sort of jump into freelancing and just go for it. Full pelt, which is kind of what I did. But what I would say is, if you are planning to go freelance, prepare for it. So, financially prepare for it, save beforehand. Something that an advice that someone gave me at the time when I went freelance was save about 6 months worth of wages, and have that in the bank before you start. So you've got a 6-month sort of leeway into getting settled, building those relationships before you need to, worry about what you need to do next. And that's a good amount of time. I think it probably took me about 3 months to feel like I was settled into freelancing. And I was lucky because I was already in journalism. So if you're starting afresh, I would say, at least 6 months, possibly even more, what you can manage. Try and sort of put that money away so that takes the burden off, but just don't jump into freelancing without anything behind you.
Yeah, having that cushion is so important, and that's really good advice. Before we move on to the topic of press trips, which I'm sure a lot of you are excited to hear about, let's talk about travel journalism no-nos. So Karen, what travel writing mistakes are there that you should avoid? And maybe there are some that you've done yourself in the past?
Yeah, quite likely. Yeah, I would say, the first one is, if you're going to pitch to an editor, don't cold pitch. Spend some real time with that title, reading it, not just one issue, not just 2 issues, like a good few issues over a period of time. You've got apps like Readly and Press Reader and things like that if you want to go back over back issues. But I do recommend looking at what they cover before you even think about pitching to a title. And that's something that can be very tempting to ignore when you get excited by an idea and you think, right, I'm going to do it. I want to do it now. No, don't stop. And have a proper read of what they cover, understand the tone and the readership, understand who your audience is going to be. So you're framing your pitch to the right people. And then go and research the editor that you're going to pitch to as well. So again, going back to Twitter, for example, go and see if there are call outs from that editor on Twitter. The hashtag journo request is quite a good hashtag to look under. A lot of editors use that with their pitch requests. But find the editor that you're looking for. Most people are on Twitter, even if they're not always active, but they do tend to put a few requests out here and there, and look at what they put into a pitch. Some people put guidelines in there. Some people say, I'm looking for this, but not this. And they're very specific about what they want. And all I can say is just never ignore that stuff. Really, really pay attention to. If someone is giving you advice on how to pitch, take it with open arms. And you're already putting yourself in a really positive place, because a lot of people do ignore that guideline or the guidance that's out there. And that's quite likely why they don't get commissioned. So do listen to editors, and every editor is different. Every editor is after something completely different. So don't think because one editor that the next one is going to be the same. These are all individual people with individual tastes in what works, with individual publications, with different audiences, and they know their audiences really well. So just don't think that you know more than them, which it can be hard when you feel like you really know a place and a great story, but you need to listen to what they want. So I can't stress that enough, really. Secondly, when you're actually writing, and this is 100% what I've done when I was maybe less experienced, is using cliched phrases. So, travel writing, you almost expect to see hidden gem or azure waters and things like that. And I'm so sure in my younger days I must have put an Azure water in there somewhere. It happens, you know, it sometimes almost flows. It's like a natural way to speak because you've read it so many times in perhaps not very well written pieces. But don't use those terms. If it feels like it's a cliche, don't use them. Just be really aware of your language and use fresh language, like really put yourself into the place that you're talking about and explain how you felt. You know, describe smells and, you know, aromas and sounds and things like that in genuine like language, instead of sort of putting this like frilly bracket around it. And that's the most genuine and most authentic travel writing you can achieve, is by being very honest about what you felt there. So yeah, don't be tempted to use those phrases and cliches.
That's fantastic advice. I love that. Well, okay, now let's go into talking about press trips. So how would you go about finding the relevant PRs for travel? How do you get onto their lists? And most importantly, I guess, how do you get invited onto those press trips?
It's a process, is what I'll say, but it's worth it getting to that place. So first of all, if you're serious about getting you know, building these connections with travel PRs, there are two things I would say to sign up to. One is to Cision and start up a journalist profile on Cision, and that's CISION. You can put in as much or as little information in there, but what I would do is put in your name, your email address and contact details, any sort of social media contact details, and also that you specialize in travel, and that's what you write about. So that automatically almost puts you on some press release mail out lists and things like that. So you will see your inbox start filling up a little bit more. Great. That's exactly what you want, because as soon as you start being on more mailing lists, you're going to start coming across more PRs. That's brilliant. The second thing I would say to sign up for is a site called Trav Media. So that's TravMedia.com. And they are essentially a similar sort of profile site for travel journalists in particular. So again, set up your contact details, and again, you'll actually receive editor call outs on there. You'll receive press releases from there and updates from other journalists. So it's a good place to network build and look at who else is out there on the Trav Media network. Most travel journalists are registered to Trav Media, and you can use it as little or as much as you need. It's something that when I first started out, I actually looked at quite a lot. I updated quite a lot. I put any commission pieces up there so that people could see that I was a genuine writer and, you know, I was starting to get commissions. And that was actually a really good tool for me when I first started out. I don't use it as much now purely because I have the experience now and I don't need to depend on that, but it's a great tool to have when you're first starting out. And again, puts your name in front of PRs, which is what you want. From there, just be a bit patient, I would say. You're just, from signing up, you're not going to suddenly end up being invited on press trips. There's a little bit in the middle where you've got to prove A, that you can write, and secondly, that you have the contacts at publications to get a commission. Because at the end of the day, the PRs who are inviting you on press trips want to see their destination or whatever it is publicized. So that's the end goal for them. So you need to be able to show you've got good connections. So the way to do that, I would say, is to go to travel events around the UK, and I would start off with, and you know, they do tend to be a bit London based, but as you get to know the industry, that will start branching out. It just might take a little bit of time to work that out, but there's World Travel Market, which is shortened to WTM, that takes place in November. And then there's a Trav Media organised event called IMM, which is International Media Marketplace, and that takes place in February, I think it is. Those are two great events which can put you in front of PRs. So I highly recommend signing up as freelance, or if you are in a staff job already, signing up as a staff writer, and attending at least one day of those events so that you can meet some PRs and schedule some meetings and get to know people. At the same time, there are a lot of journalists there. There are a lot of editors there. So if you know you're trying to sort of get to know an editor and you would really like to write to a publication, write for a publication, drop that editor an email and say, I'm going to be at IMM on so-and-so day. Would you have time for a quick coffee? That's a great way of meeting the editor that you would like to write for. So networking, I think, is just really important. So yeah, again, going back to Twitter, a brilliant tool. If you can see that, an editor is going to be at an event, sometimes they mention it in their tweets. See if you can get along to that event. If it's an event that's not ticketed, if it just needs registration, see if you can go. And go and introduce yourself. It does take a bit of confidence and a bit of boldness to go up to someone and say, hello, I'm so-and-so, I'm a new travel writer, but I really admire your publication. Do you mind if I drop you an email sometime? Have those conversations as much as possible. So that's what I would recommend for the sort of start. And then as you build up those relationships, it will get to a point where PRs, know you, they know your face, they know your name, and suddenly one day that first press trip will fall into your inbox and it will be a really lovely feeling. It just takes a little bit of work. It just shows you need to show dedication, you need to show that you are willing to do the hard work to get to that stage, and networking is the hard work. So take the time, don't be put off by having to wait for it. If you're serious enough about it, it will happen.
That's great. So once you do get invited on those press trips, how do you make the most of your time? How many stories would you personally aim to get out of a single trip, say?
I would say a minimum, depending on the length of the trip and what's actually possible to see, I would try to get at least 3. I think sometimes on a shorter trip I've done 2. On longer trips I've ended up with 4 or 5, and it's not necessarily, they don't necessarily come out at the same time, so that could be spread over the next 12 months, for example. But obviously the intention is, as a freelancer, I want to be able to earn a living. So if I can find different angles that will give me 5 different stories, I will do my best to do that. If I can only find 2, I will still do my best to do that. And I will still try to get the best stories I can out of that trip. But definitely aim for multiple stories, not just one.
Oh, that's great. Let's talk about expenses. Would you say that most press trips are fully comped, or do you find yourself sometimes having to pay for certain bits? I think some people have submitted questions asking about visas, traveling to countries where visas are required, sometimes hotels or, plane tickets. What do you think about that? Like, how do you go about it in terms of budgeting and working out with the PRs, like what you pay for and what is comped?
So if you're invited on a press trip organised by an operator or a PR, they tend to pay for almost all aspects of it, unless you do anything extracurricular. If you go off on your own and want to do something completely separate, then that's on you. But if it's covered, and it's usually very clearly detailed what's covered, so it's usually food and drink, it's usually accommodation, it's usually flights, and it's usually and transport, whether that's domestic or international generally, and also the activities. That's usually a part of a press trip, what you would call a part of a press trip. But every PR will always outline that in their sort of proposal to you, so you are very clear, and obviously ask questions if you're not. So that's usually what a group press trip organised by a PR is. If you are on an independent press trip, which is the other option, which I do quite a lot of, I do more independent press trips. It's usually because I've come up with the itinerary myself, or I've come up with the activities I want to cover myself, because it's more honed into the angles for my story. So I'm essentially going in and saying, I would really like to go to this part of Madeira, for example, because they do this very special thing that I want to write about. Can we organize this? In that case, I have to be obviously quite flexible because it's on my terms. Usually PR is very open to hosting. So everything done in country, they would be quite happy to look after. They look after transport in country, they'll look after accommodation, food, and then all those activities that you might want to take part in. In those cases, it's quite rare to get flights or international transport covered. So that's something that you might need to consider. It might mean that you need to get a second pitch or a third pitch commissioned so that you can cover those flights and it's affordable. So there's a bit of balance going on there, and I use multiple spreadsheets. Essentially, I have a nice little folder of spreadsheets where I keep track of what I'm spending, what's coming back, what's my expenses for each trip, and whether I'm covering that, if I'm breaking even, if I'm making more than that. I try and balance that out so it's very plain to see, and I know what work I need to do to actually make something from that trip. So it does take a bit of admin, it does take a bit of organization. I think that's sometimes the hardest part, because that's the boring part, and it takes time when you want to be pitching, but it's well worth it, and it's really satisfying once you get into the groove of doing it. It's really, really satisfying.
Great. Let's round off the press trip section by talking about what possibly might be the downside of press trips. Like you mentioned just now, press trips are actually, they're part of a marketing agenda, right? Like for PRs. So they are inviting you because they have a purpose. So what are some of the moral issues with accepting press trips and then possibly experiencing certain things that you don't really enjoy or you don't think highly about, and yet having to find yourself in a position where you have to write about it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's not uncommon that will happen. So for me, I write a lot about sustainability and responsible travel, and I have found myself on a few occasions on a press trip where I've been asked to take part in an activity or invited to take part in an activity that I don't think is responsible or ethical. In those situations, firstly, I wouldn't go along with it if I didn't think it was ethical, but I wouldn't also stamp my feet and make a scene. I'd have a very honest conversation with the PR and tell them why I feel that way and why I don't feel it's right for me. Sometimes if on a group trip, it's quite interesting because you might feel that way, but obviously the other people in the group, the other journalists might not, and it might still go ahead, and you might just not take part in it because you don't feel like it's on okay with your values, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine. And it's about having that honest conversation then with the person who's hosting you and taking you out there. I've been in situations where we've been invited on to like a wildlife experience, to go whale watching, for example, or dolphin watching, and I haven't been very happy once I've got there and been on the boat. I haven't been very happy with the techniques that the people driving the boat have used to get to the dolphins and the whales. And in that situation, obviously you're already in it, so it's a bit too late to say I don't want to be a part of this. And you would assume that the PR wants coverage of it. So what I have done in those situations is again sat with them and talked them through it and said, this is why it wasn't ethical for A, B and C reasons. I specialize in this. I know my topic. I know that my editors wouldn't be happy if I went back and tried to put this through as ethical. I don't feel right putting it through as ethical. It's not. And I haven't ever had an occasion where a PR hasn't understood that and said, you're absolutely right. If that's the way you feel, that's fine. And they're never ever going to force you into writing about something that you don't feel right about writing. So it's a case of sticking to your moral judgment. It's a case of sticking to your values. Don't let the fact that you've essentially been gifted this experience, don't let that interfere with your journalistic integrity. You're still there to be a journalist, and that's the understanding. So you provide an unbiased view of what you've experienced. And with that, with experiences where you may feel like you might be only seeing the good side of things, or you might you're a destination where you're only seeing like the well-off pretty side of town but not necessarily the other side of town, and there's other issues that you want to talk about, social issues and things like that. Ask those questions, always ask those questions, and don't be afraid to do your own research and actually spend some time talking to the people you meet along the way to find out more about what you think is going on. That's part of being a journalist, is to, you know, do your own research and understand the place that you're visiting. So it's not just what you see on face value. So really be up for doing that and don't take things as face value. And I think that's really, really important, especially in these times where we're trying to, you know, talk about responsible travel and sustainable travel, and that's becoming more important. I do think that that's important to bear in mind when you travel.
That's great now that you've mentioned that, because we're moving on to the last part of our talk tonight. And in case everybody doesn't know, Karen is very passionate about sustainable travel. She's written a whole book about it. So let's talk about that. Why did you want to specialize in sustainable travel, and why is that important to you?
So that has grown from my experiences in travel, if I'm honest. I started off not really knowing what sustainable travel is, but I think I was naturally, because I was a sort of a low-key backpacker. I wasn't like a Koh Road backpacker. I was a go off the beaten track backpacker. So I naturally traveled solo. I don't think I had a very big footprint when I was traveling. I always stayed in like sort of farm stays and people's houses and things like that. So it was always quite low impact travel anyway. So that was quite natural to me. And then I was invited by a expedition cruise company to travel down to Antarctica, which was an insane thing to be invited to do. Obviously I said yes, but when I was down there, it really put into perspective for me this funny place where travel and tourism meets the environment and the planet and what the planet needs. Suddenly this, you know, yes, I was in Antarctica, but I was also very aware that a large group of people were suddenly descending into this environment that isn't built for mass tourism. It isn't built for a lot of people. It should be just left to the penguins and the seals and the whales. And it's just such a pristine environment. And suddenly there were 100 people traipsing through this beautiful, beautiful scene. That sort of got me thinking a bit more. And, you know, there's a lot of talk about how tourism makes you an ambassador of the place you visit. That said a lot about Antarctica in particular. I believe that completely. You know, you can go away and you fall in love with a place, you fall in love with the culture, and you'll forever be its champion. And that's a lovely thing. That's the beauty of travel. But there is another side to that, and there needs to be a balance, because if that environment and that infrastructure, whether that's an environment or a community or wherever that is, if that can't take mass tourism, then we shouldn't be going there en masse. It's that simple. So I started seeing that more and more. And the more I sort of looked at cruising in particular, but also other sort of mass tourism regions like Barcelona and Venice, it just made me feel really icky. It just made me feel like, you know, this isn't right. And there are people really suffering as a result of me wanting to go on holiday, or not me personally, but us wanting to go on holiday. And that shouldn't be what tourism is about, because I'm coming back enriched. I'm coming back relaxed. I'm coming back having had this incredible experience that I'm going to tell everyone about and recommend. But the people there, or the environment there, is suffering as a result of me being there. So that was something that became more and more obvious with a few different trips I did. I went on a trek in Borneo to see the orangutans, which I thought was lovely and very like nature based, and it was going to be very, very special. And then when I got there, I was told that the orangutans quite often like sort of come up to you and go through your bag and pull out sweets and things, because in the past, before it was regulated, tourists would head out there and, you know, open Kit Kats in front of them, and, you know, disregard the packet on the floor before littering was a big deal. And they've got used to this. They've seen that happen, and now they are eating things out of people's bags that aren't good for their systems, and they have been affected by that. They've been conditioned by that. So there are all these negative things that I started seeing that just didn't make me feel very good about the profession I was in, and you know, made me really think about what I'm promoting. So that was a real learning curve for me. It was very much through my own experiences, but it led me into thinking, okay, well, travel is such a brilliant thing. I don't want to ever say don't travel. It's something that is in my blood as well. You know, it's something I love, but there is a way to do it better, and that's what sort of led me into talking about it more.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that story about the orangutans actually really got me. Almost got a little bit teary-eyed. Um, but I mean, there is a bit of a paradox in your particular career, right? Because you have to travel in order to be able to write, but because you are traveling, the sustainability of your lifestyle is lessened, all those flights, all that carbon footprints. Do you think travel is even compatible with sustainability in the first place?
Travel will never be a fully sustainable way of life. It's just not. But a lot of things we do is also not fully sustainable, and that's just not, what human life is. Unfortunately, it's not what consumerism is, and that's what travel falls under. That's something we need to acknowledge, rather than ignore. And I do try to do that very much so. I think this is something each travel journalist out there is probably on a bit of a journey for themselves, trying to work out where they stand on this. And I know, I've got colleagues who feel very differently about this. For me personally, and I can only speak for myself, I have made a very sort of active decision to travel less. So I still want to do my job. I still want to write about how enriching travel is. I honestly believe that travel is such a force for good, because it helps us understand other cultures. It literally stops us, seeing people as the other. It helps us really understand how the rest of the world works. We fall in love with places. We make friends in different cultures, and that's how we understand different cultures. That's such an important thing in keeping peace and bringing good to other places as well. We bring progressive views to other places, that changes places. There's a whole meeting of minds in the middle that does good all over the place, but especially to us, the traveler, we reap so many benefits from it. So I don't want that to change. I don't want us to stop traveling. And if you talk to countries in the Caribbean who depend on tourism, and there are a lot of countries out there who depend on tourism, especially island nations, they genuinely say to me sometimes, please don't stop flying altogether, and don't stop coming to us, because we need you. We need you to survive. And that's absolutely true. So for me, it's about making more informed decisions. It's not often, I don't go to the Caribbean very often, but I think on an occasion, if I was to go to the Caribbean to report on something, that is a flight I'd be willing to take. Whereas if I'm going to travel into Europe, for example, I will do my utmost to travel overland and not fly at all. And that means baking in that extra time into my itinerary. That means asking the PR for alternative routes. That means me sitting there and researching alternative routes. It takes a bit more work, but if you're passionate about it and you care about it, you will find alternatives. And you also learn to see travel differently. It's not just about what you can get out of a place, that you're coming back feeling rested and have a great story to bring back. It's actually what you can do for the place as well, and that's the other side of sustainable travel. Emissions is a massive thing that we need to address, and until the industry also addresses it, until airlines start talking about this honestly, until we are talking about it as an industry honestly, it's going to be an ongoing issue, and it's going to be an ongoing issue for a long time. So the best we can do as writers is to travel in a better way. So if we can travel overland, do it. But secondly, look at your impact in country. However you end up getting there, and especially if you end up flying, try and get out there and then do your best in the country to make sure your money is going back into the country. The things that you recommend in your article, make sure that you're recommending locally owned businesses, for example, or family run situations where the people who are actually hosting you are benefiting from your readers going there. Don't necessarily publish the big chains or the resorts that are all inclusive and keep all that money behind those walls. Do everything in your power to advise readers about the best places to go and spend their money in the country, because that's who needs the economy, the money, and to build better infrastructure. And I think that's a really important thing as well. As much as the emissions situation is clearly very pressing, and we do need to address that, people aren't going to stop traveling tomorrow. So the other side of it is to advise people on how to travel better. And that's what I try to do.
That's amazing. Like, I do think that is an ethos that, you know, every single traveler, like, it did not even necessarily just travel journalists, like every single traveler should have. And it's great. Everyone, you can learn more about it in Karen's book, The Responsible Traveler. Okay, I think we've actually hit time tonight. Is there anything else anybody would like to ask Karen while she's here? You can drop it in the chat box. We'll hang around for a couple of seconds.
And I should
feel like I had sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say very quickly, if anyone does have any questions on the sort of sustainable side of travel and spotting greenwashing and things like that, feel free to contact me over social media or drop me an email. I'm always willing to answer questions and, you know, sort of shed a bit of light on that, because it can be a bit complex, and it's not an easy thing to negotiate when you're a writer at all. So please feel free to drop me a line anytime.
Absolutely. The topic is so big and there's so much to cover. And we only had an hour, I'm afraid. But yeah, everybody do reach out to Karen personally, or, you know, we do have a range of resources on Journal Resources website, as well as some articles that Karen herself has written. So yeah, check those out. Well, thank you very much for your time tonight, Karen. This has been very enlightening for me, and I hope for everybody else who has joined us as well. I hope everybody enjoyed it. Coming up next week, next Wednesday, I think, we have an event with FIMA, who will be talking to us about how to break into freelancing in the first place if you're not already a freelancer, and what you should do to prepare for that. So hopefully we'll see everybody next week at that event. Thank you once again, Karen. It was lovely to have you. And thanks for everyone who joined us, and have a great night.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Lovely to see you.